February 1959. The Ural Mountains, Soviet Union. The indigenous people who had lived in those mountains for generations called the Peak Kholat Shakal, the Mountain of the Dead. They did not climb it. They did not speak of it without lowering their voices. Some warnings, they believed, are written into the land itself. On January 23rd, 9 students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute left the city of Sverdlovsk, bound for the northern peaks. Engineers, students, athletes, people who spent their winters finding the hardest challenge they could and doing it anyway. Most had done this many times before. Cold was not something they feared. It was something they trained for. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, a gifted engineer who built his own radio equipment in his dormitory and could navigate by stars on a moonless night. This was his 10th winter expedition. He had crossed the Urals in conditions that kept everyone else inside. To him, the mountains were not dangerous. They were home. Their goal was Mount Oterten, 300 kilometers to the north, a Grade 3 route, the highest winter difficulty classification in Soviet mountaineering. Every one of them was qualified. They expected to be back in 2 weeks. The first days were good. Their diaries describe evening jokes around the camp, songs, bad weather that lifted just in time. One member made a small camp newspaper full of inside humor. These were people who were genuinely happy to be there, who had chosen this out of everything else they could have done with their lives. On January 31st, they reached the edge of the tree line. Sheltered forest behind them, open mountain ahead. The next morning, February 1st, they began ascending Kholat Shakal. And as darkness fell, Igor Dyatlov made a decision that no investigator has ever fully explained. Instead of retreating to the shelter of the trees, less than 1.5 miles downslope, he ordered the tent pitched directly on the open mountainside. No cover, no windbreak, 30 degrees below zero. Investigators later offered possible explanations: poor visibility, fatigue, a desire to gain elevation before morning. But none of those reasons fully account for abandoning the trees entirely. Dyatlov was known for unconventional decisions that always paid off. He had led 9 people through worse conditions than this. Whatever drove that choice, it was the last decision he ever made as a leader. We don't know why. His diary from that evening offers nothing. The last entry in Igor Dyatlov's journal reads simply, "The weather is good. We continue tomorrow." They had dinner. They turned off the lanterns. The mountain went quiet. And then something happened. 25 days later, on February 26th, a search party reached the campsite. The tent was still standing, buried under a thin layer of new snow, but intact from the outside. The rescuers stood in front of it. Something about the silence felt wrong before they even touched it. The tent had been cut open from the inside, not torn by wind. Cut. Long, deliberate slashes through the canvas. 9 people had needed to exit so urgently that using the entrance was not an option. Inside, clothing folded neatly, food untouched, boots in a row, every piece of gear, every layer of insulation they had carried 300 kilometers, still there. 9 experienced mountaineers had walked out into 30 degrees below zero without stopping to put on their shoes. And they walked, not ran. The footprints in the snow showed calm, deliberate movement, groups of 2 and 3, as if following some order no one had put into words. Some prints showed bare feet. Some showed one sock on the left foot, bare on the right. After several hundred meters, the tracks disappeared beneath fresh snowfall. A mile and a half from the tent stood a large cedar pine. Its lower branches had been broken all the way up to 15 feet. Someone had climbed it in the dark, in those temperatures, without gloves. Fingernails were found embedded in the bark. The skin on the palms of at least 2 of the victims showed injuries consistent with gripping rough bark at height. They had been up there long enough to leave marks in the wood. Whatever they were trying to see, or escape, they had climbed as high as the tree would allow. At the base of the tree, 2 bodies, Krivonishenko and Doroshenko, in their underwear. Their hands were burned. They had tried to build a fire. Strips of clothing had been cut from their own bodies, likely passed to others who needed them more. Between the tree and the tent, 3 more. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin, each alone, separated by dozens of meters. Slobodin had a small skull fracture. Dyatlov was found face up in the snow, facing uphill toward the tent, as though his last act had been to try to crawl back. He never made it. The remaining 4 were not found until May. Buried under 13 feet of snow in a ravine 250 feet from the cedar tree. Thibaut Brignol had a shattered skull. Dubinina and Zolotaryov each had multiple bilateral rib fractures, the kind of damage the forensic examiner compared to the force of a high-speed vehicle collision. He had never seen injuries like these produced without a car crash, an explosion, or a fall from extreme height. None of those things had happened here. Not one of them had a bruise on the surface of their skin. No marks, no abrasions. Whatever force had done this had not touched the outside. Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, part of her lips. Investigators attributed it to the river current and animal activity. The water temperature and decomposition timeline did not support that explanation. Then came the detail no one could ignore. Several items of clothing, when tested, were emitting elevated levels of radioactive contamination, measurable on multiple garments, on multiple bodies. In those same weeks, witnesses across the region had reported glowing orange spheres moving silently through the night sky above the mountains. The Soviet military had received and logged those same reports. They were never officially explained. The government closed the case in 1959. Official conclusion: death by an unknown and compelling natural force. The files were classified as a state secret. They stayed that way for decades. The theories came later. An avalanche, except the slope was 23 degrees, and avalanches require at least 30. No evidence of snow displacement was found anywhere near the campsite. A secret military aerosol test, confirmed active in the region that same month, never declassified. Infrasound, certain wind conditions through mountain terrain can produce frequencies so low the human ear cannot detect them, yet powerful enough to trigger acute panic and an irresistible urge to flee. No instrument capable of detecting infrasound existed in 1959. None was sent. In 2019, 60 years after the deaths, Russia officially reopened the case. New conclusion: a slab avalanche. Independent experts rejected it outright. The slope, the angle, the injuries. None of it fits. The pass has carried Dyatlov's name ever since. Every year, researchers and hikers make the journey to the site. Many report something they struggle to name when they arrive. A heaviness, a stillness that doesn't feel natural. The sense of being watched by something that isn't there. The Mansi people, who have lived in the shadow of that mountain for centuries, are not surprised. They named it long before any of this happened. They were between 20 and 38 years old. Students and engineers who loved the mountains. They had survived harder expeditions than this one. They had every reason to make it home. Something drove them out of a warm tent and into 30 degrees below zero. Calm, organized, without their shoes. 65 years later, no one knows what it was. No one knows what they saw when they looked out from that cedar tree into the dark. The mountain of the dead has not given up its answer.